Alrighty, hey everyone. Today we're going to be doing Civil War generals as NBA legends. Let's get started. We're going to open it up with Ulysses S. Grant, Union General, of course. And Grant, really, I think if he had to be any NBA legend, would be Shaquille O'Neal. As we all know and love, Lakers Shaq, not Celtics or any of that other bullshit. And so let's see why. Okay, so Grant and Shaq, they both kind of have this overwhelming physical presence. Now, Grant, obviously not like he's not that big. He's like 5'8" or whatever. But you get the idea. He has a giant army. He's got the industrial might of the North. He's got it all, right? And Shaq, he's 7 foot. However, 300 some odd pounds, huge. And he's just in the paint, so... Similar to Shaq with Grant, it's like you knew what was coming, but you still couldn't stop it. Like Shaq, he's in the paint, he's backing up, puny ass centers in comparison. He's just yamming, dunking, shoving. And you know what it is. He's not shooting threes, but you can't stop it. There's nothing you can do. And Grant, similarly, in 1864 is when he starts to square off against Lee. And Lee, perfectly checks and counters everything Grant does, but it doesn't matter. He just has so much material. He's just so unrelenting. He's willing to lose soldiers. And even though Lee, tactically probably got the better of Grant a lot during the Overland Campaign in 1864, it was a strategic Union victory. So Lee knew what was coming. He still couldn't stop it. And going along with this, not pretty, it's ugly form of warfare, just slowly grinding it out. And with Shaq, especially at the free throw line, right? What a joke. It's not smooth, it's not pretty, he's not gliding through the air, but he's just big, strong, and he knows how to use what he has, so there you go. Similarly, they both wear down their opponents. We've discussed the kind of physical aspect, but mentally... as well, you can imagine, if you're in the paint, you're like, oh my God, dude, this is going to suck and all this. And Grant, I'd have to imagine for the Confederates, it's just like, oh my, what the hell is this? This guy just doesn't stop. We're stacking their bodies, but it doesn't even matter. So Grant becomes kind of a mental force in the war. As much as Lee was earlier on, he kind of ends the war with that mental force, him and Sherman, who we'll get to later. And lastly, they kind of redefined what winning meant in that regard. Shaq didn't really, to be honest. I don't know why that point's on here. But, before this in warfare, it's kind of like Napoleon wins these epic battles and then the war's over. And Grant's like, we're just going to put pressure on you and suffocate and kill you. And that's such a grimy... A lot of our mental image of warfare comes from the legacy of the Civil War, which is, it's not glorious, it's ugly, it's trenches, it's mud, it's blood. And Grant kind of pioneers that form of warfare, at least in the American sense. So, yeah, there you go. Grant, Shaquille O'Neal, Shaq, 4 rings? Grant's performance in the war that's about 4 rings worthy, I would say. So there you go. Okay, next, we're starting with the heavy hitters. Look at this. You guys will probably tune out after this one or the next. That's okay. But we got Robert E. Lee, one of the heroes of the war, one of the most famous American soldiers of all time. I have Lee as Michael Jordan. Now, hold on. I know some of you are a little... butthurt about that, little ass mad, and I hear you. But let's kind of look into why. Isn't this a cool view? On PowerPoint they have that designer. They can make it look really cool like this. So if you're designing something like this, use the designer, and you get a good view. But anyways, Robert E. Lee. Okay, mythic reputation built on their peak dominance. Now, is that not the truest thing you ever heard about Lee? And about Jordan too. Think about it, right? Does anyone talk about Wizards Jordan? Of course not. Now, obviously, Jordan had a pretty long peak, but, it's kind of starting in the late 80s, and then he takes a break in the 90s, and then he retires at the end of 98. So if you really think about it, it's not even 10 years where Jordan's really in his prime, on the court, right? And you contrast that to someone like LeBron, who's been in his prime for probably 17, 18 years, and you kind of get the sense, okay, Lee is that guy in 1862 and 1863, really. 1864 he does good, but he doesn't have a lot of like really significant morale changing victories for the North, or sorry, for the South, sorry. And so really Lee's reputation comes from mid 1862 to mid 1863. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Just a year in time where he was kind of like master of the war. Obviously, he did really well in 1864, and he basically kept the South alive single-handedly. But his reputation is on that 1 year stretch from 1862 to 1863. Very, very interesting. Secondly, psychological warfare. If you've seen The Last Dance, you know what I'm talking about. Jordan took things personally. He liked to get in their heads. He liked to chirp them on the bench. He liked to, even if they're on the dream team, they're playing ping pong, he's like, no, we're staying up all night. So he's really getting in people's heads, and Lee was the same. Now, of course, Lee was a Southern gentleman. He's not like a freak. He's not going to do or say anything crass, but he has such this aura around him. He's so audacious that Union generals are like collapse under pressure. They're like scared to face Lee, and he uses that against them in the same way that Jordan did. So there you go. Thirdly, they thrived on precision and timing, not brute force. So, we talked about Grant before, right? He's Shaq. That's brute force. Lee's not really like that. He doesn't have as many troops. Most of the time, he's outnumbered 2-1, if not 3-1. But with precision, with timing, with speed, and audacity, he's able to, conjure up victories out of nothing when he really shouldn't be able to. Very fascinating stuff there. And Jordan, goes without saying. Now, he's obviously got some athleticism. He's got mass. But, he's flying through the air. He's, hitting jump shots, fadeaways, things like that. He's not backing people down in the post maybe as much as Shaq is. So, very interesting detail, and this is one that I kind of thought about a bit, is that they elevated a smaller supporting cast. So, if you look at the Jordan Bulls, now a lot of people will tell you, the roster they have is like kind of impeccable. I actually don't particularly think so. Now, I'm no expert, but some of the players, especially on the second three-peat run, are kind of forgettable. Ron Harper, Tony Kukoc, like who even cares about those players? I'm sure there's going to be some Ron Harper head in in the comments saying he was awesome. I don't doubt that he was decent, but he was just decent, right? Tony Kukoc, who even cares? Totally forgettable player no one cares about. For some reason, other players in that section or era of the team, I'm not remembering. But in the first three-peat, for instance, Bill Cartwright, like, who even is that? He sucks. Horace Grant, kind of a meme. He wasn't bad, but he was better on the Magic after. You've got, oh my gosh, John Paxton, I think, is the PG. Like, okay, great. And then kind of decent Scottie Pippen. I think Pippen kind of comes into his own later on in that era. But you get the idea. Jordan really elevated a great team, into supposedly the most dominant epic teams of all time, and there's a lot of kind of bums on the team, hate to say it. And Lee is somewhat similar in that regard. Now, the South had great generals, Longstreet and Jackson, who we'll get into, but I really think those individuals would be footnotes in history if it weren't for Lee. Like I said earlier, he kept the Confederacy alive for a long time, and without him, that war probably ends very quickly, or far quicker, I should say. So, I think Jordan, similarly, I don't think Dennis Rodman would be much of a memorable individual if he didn't play on those Jordan teams in the late 90s. And same for Pippen. I think he'd be more like, even though Drexler is remembered well. I don't think he has as much cultural cachet as Pippen. So, yeah, lastly, cultural symbol and icon. Jordan represents basketball in a way that no one else does. He's not the logo, but how many people have said he should be the logo by now and all this. And again, Lee represents the American South. Some people will say, instead of for good, it's for ill, but they're annoying and stupid. And Lee is, emblematic of an entire section of the country that has a long history. And he did so not by winning. That's kind of interesting, right? You would think our figures are the ones we idolize because they won or they achieved great things. Lee has no political achievements to his name. Not the only, but the war in which he was a general in, he lost, and yet he's still the hallmark of the American South, and that, of course, is due to his nobility. It's due to his post-war years kind of binding up the country's wounds and reconciling with the North. And, he was just so incredible of a man that he's still remembered, and he's the number one on the American South's list without winning. Kind of interesting. That's where him and Jordan depart, of course. Jordan with 6 rings, but, everything else kind of fits so perfectly. And I think most importantly, Jordan's recognized as like the GOAT of basketball, and at least as far as American generals are concerned, I think it's pretty clear that Lee is the greatest American soldier, greatest American general, and I don't think that will change for a very long time. And similarly with Jordan. So, finally, man, this one's going on a while, huh? But there's a lot of revision about their careers, so, especially in the LeBron era, and the case gets better by the year, I'll admit, and I used to be really into basketball about 7 years ago, not so much anymore, but a lot of people want to relegate Jordan to number 2. I've even seen some say 3. You get a lot of old head Kareem fans who just don't even know what they're talking about. And, they want to revise the cultural expectation of Jordan as the GOAT. And same for Lee. Especially if you go on Reddit, do me a favor, type in Reddit General Lee good general, or you can probably just say, was Robert E. Lee a good general? And you'll get like so many guys saying, okay, well, Lee was good tactically, but his strategy wasn't really good. He overextended and he thought he could invade and blah blah blah. And these are just clueless idiot people who have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea about any actual thought of Lee about the strategy and the predicament the Confederacy was in. They don't understand that his army didn't have shoes. The men were shoeless. They couldn't eat. They were starving. They didn't have fucking clothes. And, anyone who kind of observes dispassionately will tell you Lee was not perfect. And, there are many mistakes, actually, to look at Gettysburg being the most notorious. But really, that's almost incidental because every general makes mistakes, and then many generals that we know throughout history, Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, they benefited from certain things, and Lee largely was at a disadvantage throughout his career as a general. And what he was able to do, outnumbered, outgunned, outsupplied, with more political support at home, is nothing short of incredible. And even his critics, some British military historians, there's one that calls him the greatest soldier who ever spoke English, which is quite the compliment. And then the other, I think his name is Fuller, he critiques Lee and is constantly like, bro, I think Grant is probably a little bit better. But he acknowledges what Lee was able to do was incredible. And same for Jordan. So anyways, let's move on. Next, we got Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Look at Jackson there standing like a stone wall. That's how he gets his nickname at the first battle of Bull Run. Probably the best nickname ever, I would have to say, at least for Americans. So I have Jackson as Kobe Bryant. Okay, now why? Well, they both have an obsessive intensity. Jackson is like the most terrifying figure of the war. Some people would say Sherman. I politely disagree. And of course, Kobe has that Mamba mentality. He treats it like it's his life on the line. And Jackson was the same. He was just crazy about war. Like, he was such a warrior. Didn't care about when he was going to die. He said that time was fixed. And just pushed his soldiers like you would not believe, making them march 30, 40 miles. And they're called his foot cavalry because they're able to move so much. And he just expected, like, the world of his soldiers if they were, like, inevitably going to get annihilated, surrounded, and they retreated. He would, like, try and court-martial the general. Garnett, I believe, is who that happened to. And he's just kind of a wild, but, like, incredibly skilled and talented general. And Kobe, of course, is the same for an NBA player. Relentless pressure. That's kind of what I was saying about Jackson earlier. He's in the Shenandoah Valley campaign of 62. He's just constantly marching up and down. Like, no one knows where he is, what he's doing. He's hitting hard. He's concentrating. He's just all over the place in an unstoppable way. And Kobe, of course, is like that with the full court presses and that famous clip of him trying to guard Curry. So, yeah, there you go. Number 3, unpredictable brilliance and mediocrity. Kind of a hot take. I mean, I guess it depends if I'm talking to a Civil War head or a basketball fan. But Jackson really was capable of some of the most brilliant maneuvers of the war. And the Valley Campaign of 62 is one of, if not the most impressive achievements of the entire war. Jackson, I think, does very well at Second Manassas as well. But then you have times, the 7 Days Campaign, where Jackson's just like shit in the bed with no explanation. Now, he was probably really tired. He's marching in the middle of the night to get there as Lee ordered. But really, especially if you read Battle Cry of Freedom, Jackson could have turned what was a Confederate victory into like a decisive Confederate victory. And, for whatever reason, he just didn't make it there in time, was kind of dawdling and being a silly Billy. And same for Kobe. Kobe's capable of putting up 81, getting, rings by himself or with Shaq. And then he's also capable of just shitting the bed, shooting like 30% and just sucking. And not a lot of people like to talk about that now, but it's true. He, look up his stats, right? I think his career field goal percentage like 45. It's not particularly good. It's not bad, but I think Jordan's at like 50 if I'm not mistaken. So faith and personal execution, I think, Kobe knew, even if he didn't often, like, he's taking the shot. He's like, I'm taking the shot. I can do this. He had that utmost personal conviction, like others, like Jordan, but Jackson was the same. He would tell after they won at Bull Run, he was like, give me 10,000 men and I'll take Washington tomorrow. So they just knew they could do it, and, they had utmost extreme self-confidence, which is, can be a blessing but also a curse. So as we talked about in the 7 Days Campaign, it was kind of an issue sometimes. And then, of course, their legends are shaped by their early exit. So Kobe flew into the side of a mountain. He wasn't piloting the helicopter, so maybe he was flown into the side of a mountain. I know that's we should probably be a little more respectful about that. But he tragically died in January of 2020, and Jackson was shot by his own men after, or near the end of the South's greatest victory at Chancellorsville. And, Lee says famously, Jackson got shot in the arm because it was dark, and he has to get his arm amputated, and he, loses his left arm, and Lee famously says, he's lost my left arm, and I've lost my right. Which, that's kind of crazy, right? Because the battle right after that is Gettysburg, and Lee would go to his grave saying, if Jackson was with me at Gettysburg, I would have won. And I'm inclined to agree. I am inclined to agree. So sad that they both died so early, and I would have been very curious to see how Stonewall's career played out in the last 2-ish years of the war, but sadly, he was called home. Next up, Sherman. All the big hitters. You guys are lucky. I have William Tecumseh Sherman, isn't that a cool name, as Steph Curry. Now, kind of interesting, right? Sherman looks a little intimidating, and Curry looks like a little bitch, who's kind of like a short, ugly guy, even though he's really not that short, but for the NBA, you could say. And so why do I say that? Okay. They really changed the way the game was played. Of course, Curry, the three-pointer is maybe of more limited importance prior to his career, but now it's, and some people even say ruin basketball because people realize that the three-pointer is probably disproportionately a good idea if you have a decent shooting team. Sherman does the same, but with total war. So before, in the Civil War, they kind of thought when it started, like, okay, we'll have some nice battles. Whoever wins, wins, and then we can all go home and just chill. But Sherman recognizes and implements total war, which means, guess what? This is a war between peoples, not armies. So even civilians contribute to the Confederate war effort. And so if we starve them, take their stuff, burn their cities down, destroy their railroads, we can win because the Confederate war effort is stabilized by their provision of food and things like that. And also, if they get angry enough, they can, kind of try and force the Confederate government to give up, right? So, weaponize range instead of brute force. Really, that makes no sense for Sherman. Maybe only in a very limited sense. So I probably should have reviewed that one, but obviously Curry, he shoots from the three, goes without saying. I won't belabor the point. Sherman does strike really deep into enemy territory, though, so maybe that's the way of thinking about it. He marches all the way to Savannah, and Georgia's kind of like the heart of the Confederacy in a way, maybe geographically. So yeah, there you go. Sherman from the three ball from range into Savannah. So, demoralization as a primary tactic. I kind of already expanded on that with Sherman and Total War, and I think for Curry, it's like, there's a variety of different ways to demoralize a team in basketball, but really like a dagger three kind of hurts in a way that many other things don't. One, just that it's more points, we all get that, but just that it was achieved seemingly without effort, without kind of drawing up like a genius play, the pick and roll, a kind of like crafty bucket from inside the key. I think, in my opinion, it reminds me of the series with the Thunder in 2016. Some of those dagger threes were, I think, more demoralizing in ways that other plays aren't. So, there you go. Efficiency over romantic heroics. Sherman is similar to his superior Grant in this regard, and same for Curry. I'm sure he's got great highlights, but Kyrie to me is a bit more flashy. Obviously, like Kobe or something like this or someone like that would be a bit more flashy. And Curry's just kind of, the running the pick and roll outside the three, and he's just chalking up threes that he makes a lot, right? So there you go. Looked fragile until he proved unstoppable. This, I think, was the most interesting of the comparisons. Curry starts his career as kind of like a, scrawny, just like a total fucking loser, like bum. Looks like a little kid on the court. I said that earlier. I don't have a problem with Curry personally, but I just have to be honest about that. And Sherman likewise starts his career. Everyone thinks he's like insane. He's having like mental breakdowns. And he's kind of viewed as like this weirdo. Like he denies enlisting as like a higher rank than he could have. And he has this famous line, which is that Grant stood by me when I was crazy, and I stood by him when he was drunk. And like, what a tag team that is, And yeah, they won the war together, so I guess it worked. But there you go. Next, we got George Gordon Meade. A lot of you don't know him, and I'll kind of elaborate, but I have George Gordon Meade as Kawhi the Claw Leonard. Okay, why do I say that? Look at this fruity fucking wallpaper on the left here. I was dying when I pulled that up. I thought that was so funny. But anyways, because like, who's a Kawhi fan? Like, is anyone really a Kawhi fan? But anyways, George Meade and Kawhi, they're quiet, they're efficient, and lethal when it mattered most. So Kawhi, that 2019 Finals, we all know, Raptors beat the stacked Warriors. Now, Warriors were suffering with injuries, but let's be real, like, Warriors probably should have won that one. But Kawhi kind of made it happen, and what a run that season was. And similarly, George Meade, like I said, a lot of you don't know him. He's the victor of Gettysburg. He won the most important battle in American history, and most people don't know him. That's kind of interesting. And I have to think that, 25, 30 years from now, Kawhi will be similar. He'll be kind of a footnote of NBA history, and it'll be one of those things like, did you know the Warriors lost to the Raptors in 2019? Everyone will be like, what? But yeah. So there you go. Defensive beast, Kawhi. I mean, how many all NBA defensive teams is he on? I couldn't tell you, but I'm sure it's a lot. And similarly, George Meade at Gettysburg, he just kind of came, set up shop on the hill, and just sat his ass down. And he sat his white ass down and did what needed doing. And it worked. So, no desire for fame or mythology. Like, I call him Gayson Gaycum, but his name is Jason Tatum. Doing the, we did it! And trying to do the Kanye and the Kobe pictures. Like, how embarrassing. But Kawhi doesn't, he's probably had a lot of opportunity to market himself and become, like, popular and, like, put on a facade or whatever, but he just does the, yeah, and is, like, content being a total meme. And Meade was the same way. He just didn't, he won Gettysburg. Like, if I did that, I'd be, like, writing everyone and doing all these interviews after the war. And as far as I know, he was somewhat reserved. So, won against the Juggernaut by themselves. Again, Gettysburg for Meade, and of course the Warriors for Kawhi. And I actually think the analogy holds because the Confederates lost Jackson, and I think KD was out for a couple games in 2019. So it's an apt analogy. They still should have lost, but they won. According to the narrative at the time, right? And then they departed shortly thereafter. I think that was like Kawhi's last season, or his second to last season with the Raptors, and then, of course, he went to the Clippers and did fuck all. But Meade did the same, although in a different way. He wasn't. Lincoln was mad because he wanted Meade to pursue and crush Lee's army after Gettysburg, but it was a vicious, rough fight for both sides, and Meade didn't feel like his army really was prepared, or that he felt he could. If by attacking Lee's army, he could still stumble into a total disaster, which, could have been true, could have not been, but regardless, Grant became, commander of all Union armies in 64, which is only a couple months after Gettysburg. So Meade was not on the scene long, but he happened to just win the most important battle in American history. So there you go. James Longstreet. Not a lot of you know him either. He's in the book Killer Angels, if you've read that. I'm actually reading it right now. And I have James, nicknamed Peter Longstreet. He's from Georgia, by the way. One of few Confederate generals from there. And I have him as Scottie Pippen. So you can probably see where this is going. They're the ride or die second in command. Now, Jackson was, of course, Lee's second, really. But he dies, in the middle of the war, but Longstreet rides it out to the very end. So, in that regard, they're kind of both, playing second fiddle to, the greatest to ever practice their art, right? Now, they also had clashes with the superstar. So Longstreet, kind of bickers with Lee at 2nd Manassas. He refuses to attack when Lee asks him to. And then at Gettysburg, he says, like, we shouldn't even be here. We should be trying to get in between Meade and Washington and playing defense. Now, I don't really think that was a particularly possible avenue at the time, and I think Lee was thinking politically at the time, which is the South's best hope for winning the war. And, whatever. Anyways, the point is they kind of clashed with the superstar and Pippen. While I can't maybe think of an anecdote during their tenure together, him and Jordan, they're famously not on good terms now. So there you go. They're kind of like the realists in a romantic system. Not romantic like in a gay system. But, Lee is the Southern gentleman, this cavalier. He's going to win the war with a smashing victory at Gettysburg. And Longstreet's kind of like, we need to just hold off on defense as long as we can and try and win that way. Now, Lee does take that approach in 1864, and it's a strategic loss. So you could see why Lee doesn't really like that idea, and that, the logical extenuation of operating on the defensive is surrender, right? You want the initiative. You want to dictate the terms and pace of your conflict. That's just classic war theory, right? Now, Scotty, I don't even know how this applies to him at all. To be honest with you, I really don't. He just played basketball. So, ChatGPT really kind of screwed me on that one. But they both did prove themselves independently. This is actually one that I thought of myself. Of course, Jordan leaves the Bulls for 2 years to play baseball after his father was murdered. Now, whether that was due to Jordan's gambling or not, I'll leave for you to decide. But anyways, Scotty actually does really well leading the Bulls in those 2 years, and I think they make the playoffs the second year. But anyways, yeah, they did pretty good. Longstreet does the same. I think after Gettysburg, he goes out to the west. Now, it's weird because, it's a battle in Georgia, but it's the Western Theater, but it's just west of the Appalachian Mountains. But he helps win at Chickamauga without Lee. Now, it's still a rough battle. Confederates, I think, even take more casualties than they inflict, but it gets Rosecrans, the Union general, removed from his position, so that's all you really need to know about whether it was a Confederate victory or not. So, and then history underrates him because he wasn't the myth. Longstreet has a interesting career because he becomes a Republican after the war, which in the South is like a social death sentence. And similarly for Pippen, he's known as he's like the archetypal second fiddle, and he could have been remembered as a great player in his own right, but he kind of sacrificed for the team and was second fiddle to the greatest of their time, and that's how they won. And similarly, Longstreet was on Lee's staff, and again, without Lee, it's likely he may not even be remembered. So they're underrated, but they clearly are not as good as who they were tagging along with. All right, up next we got George McClellan. He is, in my opinion, James Hardin. Okay, now why is that? So a lot of you don't know George McClellan. He's like the main Union general in the beginning of the war, and he's brilliant on paper. Oh boy, everyone thought he was going to be the bee's knees and just really whip them Rebs, huh? And similarly, Hardin, you look at his stat sheet and you're like, oh my lord, this guy's incredible. They're both kind of, okay, I don't know about that for James Hardin, but McClellan's pretty charismatic and popular. His men love him. And even when he gets sacked rightfully by Lincoln after a series of just unforgivable and shameful refusals to engage the enemy and undermining the administration, blaming things on everyone else, his men still love him because he turned them from, volunteer farmers into a legitimate fighting force in the Army of the Potomac. And, even though I really do not like McClellan whatsoever, that is an achievement, and that is something you have to acknowledge. Hardin, I think, even though, in my opinion, I don't find him to be particularly charismatic and popular, fear the beard, that's a real thing. I think people kind of like him for having the beard. I think especially if you remember the 2010 to 2012 OKC days, you're a big fan of Harden because he was like such a good kind of third option. So yeah, there you go. However, they're both hesitant and crunch moments. So Harden, I'm thinking of the 2018 Western Conference Finals, Game 7 against the Warriors. Absolute choke fest, 27 missed threes. And I think that's kind of a staple of Harden's career. He's just really never kind of gotten it done when he needed to. And McClellan, I mean, really an embarrassing record in 1862. And I just struggle to even explain his failure to engage, other than being terrified of Robert E. Lee, even though Lee had no real reputation at the time, but perhaps McClellan was awed by his record in the Mexican War. But really, I just think McClellan didn't even want to win, to be honest with you. So, yeah, 1862, give you a perfect example. In Antietam, that's the Union victory that leads to the Emancipation Proclamation. One, it's barely a victory. It's tactically a Confederate win. McClellan literally had Lee's battle plan. He found it on the side of the road because a carrier dropped it for the Confederacy. And he still did not win a tactical victory and destroy Lee's army. So, I mean, just a shameful record in 1862. I can't think of anything worse, but overestimates opponents. Now, how much you could say that about Harden, I don't know. Do we have record of him being like, there are 10 guys on the floor, But maybe mentally he got kind of the jitters against the Warriors, which, to be fair, that team was stacked. So maybe that doesn't apply to Harden. But McClellan famously thought Lee had twice or even 3 times as many men as he had most of the time, and that led him to not engage. And Lee kind of learned this about McClellan. And Lee had a good read on who he was facing. Like, before Gettysburg, he knew, like, Meade is going to do everything right. Like, he's used to McClellan being like, whatever. He's like, I know Meade is going to do everything right, and to win this, we're just going to have to, we're going to have to carry the day. We're not going to be able to rely on an idiot like McClellan to help us make our victory for us. And yeah, they both have, because of that, a legacy of unrealized potential. Maybe in a different era, you'd have to think Harden could have multiple rings, multiple MVPs, and be one of the, greats of all time. But sadly, the story with him is just, did he really even get what he wanted to done? Probably not. So, all right, next, we're almost near the end here. We got Jeb Stuart. Now, his name is like James Edward something, but he goes by Jeb. That's why there are periods after each initial there. A lot of you don't know him, but I'll explain. I have him as Magic Johnson. Okay, pretty interesting, right? So, Jeb Stuart, he is the most famous, maybe other than Nathan Bedford Forrest, cavalry commander for the Confederacy. And he is eminently charismatic and flamboyant. He is the archetypal Southern Cavalier gentleman, wears a feather in his cap, nice blacked boots, golden shining buttons and sword and all that. He's like the consummate Southern gentleman. And of course, if you are familiar with Magic's game, he's a flashy passer, big glittering white smile. He's charismatic. Everyone loves him. His nickname is Magic, and flamboyant. He's showing off. Showtime Lakers, blah, blah, blah. Rapid maneuvering. So Stuart was known for some really interesting feats, which is riding around the Union Army deep in their territory, multiple times. And that was like a big, embarrassing thing for the Union at the time. But Jeb Stuart became like very famous for that reason, for doing it. And similarly, Magic, he's not super fast, but he can get up and down the court pretty easy. Overconfident, and they both miscommunicate. So Magic, in this case, he would be miscommunicating with the HIV-infected whore that he was sleeping with that got him HIV. And for Jeb, it's really sad because he was supposed to keep Lee apprised of the Union Army's movements right before Gettysburg, and he fails. And so Lee kind of stumbles into Gettysburg, doesn't really know what to do for that reason. And if Jeb had kept him informed, I think there's a very good chance that Lee wins Gettysburg. And it's sad, too, because him and Lee were particularly close. I think he was good friends with Lee's son, and they knew each other well before the war. So very sad that he kind of didn't do what he needed to do at Gettysburg. Now, some people say it's because Lee's orders weren't clear. I disagree. I've read the orders. I think they're very clear. It's keep me informed about where their army is, and he doesn't do that. So there you go. Legendary but flawed. Jeb, that kind of black mark of Gettysburg will always be on his record. And, AIDS for Magic. He'll always have AIDS. So there you go. All right, last one. We've got Joseph Hooker. Now, not a Fightin' Joe Hooker, his nickname. Not a lot of you know him, but I have him. He's a Union general, as you can see outlined in blue. I have him as Kyrie Irving. Okay, why is that? Silly ass fan edit of Kyrie here. A little 1975 in the background. That's cool. Flashy and charismatic. Goes without saying for Kyrie, who remembers I believe it's the 2012 Team USA practice where he dribbles through the entire team and crosses up Kobe. That's either 2012 or 2016, but that clip was epic. And Hooker, I don't know. I don't really think he was particularly flashy and charismatic, but ChatGPT seemed to think so. So admittedly, I don't know as much about Hooker as I probably should. But I swear most of these I did myself. I just needed a couple points on ChatGPT. So there you go. Rebuilt his team. Of course, Kyrie leaves the Cavs, and then he goes to the Celtics. He goes to the Mavericks. And Hooker, I think, reorganizes the Army of the Potomac following Burnside's loss at Fredericksburg in December of '62. So there you go. Collapsed under pressure. Now this is really where it gets bad. So Hooker takes over the Army of the Potomac in early 1863, and then shortly thereafter he confronts Robert E. Lee at Chancellorsville, which, if you remember from earlier, that's the most smashing Confederate victory of the war, and he outnumbered Lee 2-1. He had over 100,000 soldiers, and Lee divides his army multiple times and gets behind his flank, Jackson's Corps Brigade or whatever. He gets behind his flank and just crushes his army. So very embarrassing. What makes it even funnier is that before this, he was telling Lincoln, "Don't worry, I'm about to whip Bobby Lee's ass, it's over." And Lincoln has his famous reply. He says, "The hen is the wisest of all the animals because she does not crow until the egg is laid." Which is, I know, you're kind of oh wow, okay, epic, but really what that means is don't brag until you've done the deed, And famously he gets annihilated at annihilated's a strong term, but he gets wrecked at Chancellorsville, and Lincoln, I think, says "Oh my God, what will the country think?" He's so despairing. He thinks the South's about to win the war. So, all right. Legacy of what could have been. Lots of them have this, I think you'll see. But yeah, Kyrie, it's kind of damn, if him and LeBron had kept teaming up, what could they have achieved, especially after the Warriors kind of disintegrate thereafter. And Hooker, it's kind of man, dude, maybe if you didn't lose at Chancellorsville, I still think he would have folded because he was terrified of Lee at the time. But, yeah, I mean, who knows, right? So, alrighty, I think, yep, that's it. Well, thank you, everyone, for your time. Hopefully you enjoyed. Let me know which generals you agreed with, which you didn't. Any NBA legends you think fit other generals. And, yeah, just leave a comment below. I love to hear your thoughts so much. You guys are so smart. you're definitely not totally stupid as fuck and have no idea what you're talking about. But thank you all. Have a great day.